This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to a fresh new session on credit risk modeling. And we were discussing the capital modeling frameworks. Now, before I begin, a few important things. So, up to the point that we have done till now, is we have started with the data, right? And we had done the data analysis, right? So we now know that. So we analyzed the data for. So we had done all the basic data analysis exercises like missing observations analysis, redundancy analysis, source to target mapping exercises, and so on, right? And and we had so we had dealt with the data set. Now we are at a stage where we are discussing the model design. Now, what I want you guys to do is to use my code, the code that we had developed. That code is archived in the code section, right? So I have put the updated code over there. So my expectation is, or my suggestion is that you take the data set, take my code, the code that we had written, right, and documented, and start replicating the code on a line by line basis, right? So that so while you are replicating, there would be some questions that would come up to your mind because in the next few weeks we will not be working on developing SaaS codes. So the way we will be doing it is I will be discussing model design, the key concepts of model design, right, for PD LGD EAD. And then from there, I will go to talk about development calibration. And now I'll be talking full fledged about the guidelines, right? Because my objective initially was to get yourself identified with the data to help you understand how the data, so how the analysis that we do hands on has to be aligned to the guidelines. Now, before I go back to the SAS codes, obviously I will go back and we will develop the PD model and all, right? But before that, I want to discuss the guidelines in details because the model designing section and everything will be required. So we will require to refer to the guidelines and stuff, right? So I want the guidelines to be totally in place, the understanding of the guidelines to be totally in place, right? So we will be discussing guidelines in details, all regulatory concepts in details, right? That when I'm talking about PDLGD EAD, right, I'm computing the expected loss. So from there, I am going to compute the RWA and things. So how this flow is actually happening, right? So when I'm defining or developing a model, right, and I'm trying to assess the performance of the model, how am I doing that? So these are some of the critical questions that we will be talking about, right? From PD as per for PD, LGD, EAD, and and we will be discussing the model performance measures and everything for in detail. So only after we have covered this part, I will go back and start replication in SAS. So until and unless I go back, so my request is that you start replicating the data, right? And and if you and you know maybe because while we were discussing these sections in the classroom, right, we may have missed out some nuances or there may be some gaps in the codes or anything, there could be anything, right? So if you find anything like once Kshitij pointed out in terms of recordings and excel file namings, I believe there can be something which you may find out in the code, right? So please start replicating the code, right? And also you can start updating the Excel summaries and Excel results and everything. So please try to you know So my request is to kind of try to do that so that we don't uh, what do I say? So that we are kind of hands on with whatever has been discussed, right? So that by the time I go back with the model design replication, model design creation, and everything, so you would be in a better position to understand that. So, so that is my request, right? Now let's go back to the section that we had started discussing. Okay, so so in the last class we started talking about the model design corresponding to the probability of default, right? So we started talking about that. Now, while we were talking about probability of default, right, one thing that we saw was, so we discussed the model design under some aspects. The first was what was the key target variable. So to estimate so for probability of default, the objective was to estimate the chances that the borrower will default in the next 12 months. And for that, we require and to create the model development base for the accounts, we require 13 months of observation period and 12 months of performance. So, in the last class, we discussed as to what the 13 months of observation is, as to what the 12 months of performance. So, what exactly is an observation period? What is a performance period is something that we had discussed in the last class. So, after that, we also discussed what are the kind of accounts that should be included in the books of the bank, right? As on the snapshot, a default, non-default in the performance. So we discussed the different aspects of probability of default. Now, while we addressed the probability of default, right, there was so some of the other concepts the related concepts that we spoke about, right? So some of the related concepts that we spoke about over here included the concept of snapshot. Now, this is not only relevant to PD, but it is also relevant to LGD and EAD. But we try and understanding these concepts in terms of the probability of default. So the first concept that we talked about over here was the concept of a snapshot month, right? A snapshot month is nothing but it's a sample month, right? From 20, so basically, if my data is covering a period of 2011-06 to 2016-09, or maybe any time period, right? Then each of the months are snapshots or sample months. Now, this available period or the total vintage that is available to me, so these snapshots are divided into number one, model development snapshot, out of time validation snapshot, and the out of time validation snapshot. And the model development data is further subdivided into training and holdout or in sample data. So this is basically the concept of a snapshot. Now, it is not that all snapshots can be incorporated to develop PD models or uh, for developing these models. Now, the reason as to why it is not possible is that for developing PD and LGD models, right? So these accounts have to have some basis, certain characteristics which has to be satisfied in the data. So, for example, like for a PD model, the 13 months of observation and 12 months of performance has to be included. So if I have to choose an account, I have to choose only those accounts which satisfy this criteria. Also, the data fields, if I'm choosing a sample month which does not have the complete 12-month performance, that is not correct. So I will have to choose those months where this 13 months or 12 months of performance is available. So for all the snapshot months may not be chosen as modeling snapshots. Right? So how is modeling snapshot different as a concept from snapshot months? So snapshot months chosen for model development and out of time validation. For out of time validation is known as snapshot modeling snapshots. So how do we identify this? So we have used the same example that if the data spans over 2011-06 to 2016-09, then all the months may not be used for model development. So the next question that comes over here is, from a modeler's perspective, how would you choose the modeling snapshot? What are the factors that you would look into while choosing the modeling snapshots? So over here, we have, so there are some criteria that we would take into account. The first criteria is that whenever I am choosing the snapshot months, I should be choosing them such that they cover the seasonality in the product's behavior. Now, this concept of seasonality is somewhat specific to the retail sector, right? To the retail products. And what is that? So that product is that the seasonality is that it must be chosen that it covers the seasonality in a product's behavior. What do I mean by seasonality? Think about any retail products. Think about a credit card, right? Because that's the most, I believe that is the most dynamic kind of a retail lending product that one can have. So what happens in this credit card? In credit cards, you are kind of paying the money every month, and whatever amount you use, you are paying back a part of it. So you free up the limit and you are using that limit again, and hence it's known as a revolving product, right? Now think about the payment patterns for a credit card. During throughout the year, you will have a certain specific pattern for paying in credit cards, right? Now, after a point, now during the festival season, let's say Christmas, Diwali, and so on, right? So, when you are kind of looking to going through these seasons, the delinquency on credit cards tend to increase because people tend to spend more on festivals and their personal enjoyments, and they kind of tend to be negligent on the card payments because their expectation is that with the new year, when their bonuses roll out, a majority or a chunk of the payments are done. So as a result, it is generally observed that during the last quarter of every year, the delinquency trends on the credit cards tend to go up. Now, when it goes up, and again it subsides during March. So, if my data is taken during the period March, April, May, June throughout the year, it will lead to a bias in the payment patterns of the borrowers, in the delinquency trends of the product when I'm looking over a long period of time. So what we generally need to do is, or what we generally tend to do is, we take quarter end snapshots, snapshot months as the modeling snapshots. So let's say I take 12, March, June, September, December, and as on March, you will have the picture of your portfolio at the end as it is standing at the end of first quarter. And at June, you will have the behavior. So how your portfolio has behaved in the second quarter. So choosing the month, quarter and snapshots help you capture the overall behavior of the portfolio over a period of time. Hence, we would always want these. So we would target to have these month end snapshots, the quarter end snapshots, as a data or as a part of our model development data. So this not only covers the fact that your your quarter end picture is captured, but it also helps you assess the the seasonality in the payments and in the delinquency trends. So therefore, a modeling snapshot, when you are choosing a modeling snapshot, the first thing it has to be taken that has to be taken into account is the payment towards. So is that the seasonality in the behavior of the payment and delinquency trends are appropriately captured, right? So that is one of the key considerations that one should have when they are building these models, right? Okay, seasonality in the product's behavior. So I will add one more line to this. This will help in capturing. This will help in capturing the trends in the delinquency and payment pattern at different points of the year. The seasonal trends, points of the year. So this is one of the most important points that we should keep in mind. So let me just check. Let me use this color at different points of the year, right? The second that we have over here is that the chosen snapshot must have 12 month of performance data, because if 12 month of performance data is not available to us, then the chosen data set, chosen snapshot like must have 12. So basically 12 month of performance data. Otherwise, if that is not available, then the performance default flag will not be created. We will not be able to create the performance default flag, like the way we had explained in the last session. We had explained the creation of the flag, right? So whether the 90 TPD has been satisfied. And one thing that we remember is that one thing that we had explained is that it's a ever defaulter definition. Once a defaulter will always be a defaulter, right? So This is something that we would. So the chosen snapshot must have 12 months of performance data. Okay. Now
Tanmoy,
this,
I have a doubt over here.
yeah, tell me.
So, in the second point, you have mentioned that the chosen snapshot must be of 12 months, and you also said that once a borrower is defaulted, it's a ever default, right? So, it should be ever
Correct.
default in the performance window or in the observation window also.
A performance window.
Okay.
So
In
if a
observation,
borrower has defaulted in observation in the last 13 months, right? That means you are not including it in the PD development base. The snapshot that you are choosing, as on that snapshot, the customer has to be a non-default. Otherwise, you will not choose. So, for example, Kshitij, suppose I'm taking 2011-09 as my snapshot, okay, my modeling snapshot. Now, I'm including a customer or an account ID 123 over there. Now, if the account ID has defaulted in the last 13 months, then I will not be including that customer in that snapshot, right? Because he has already defaulted in that snapshot. Now, if the customer has, I will include that customer or that account in that snapshot if it is non-default as on 2011-09. But in the next 12 months, the account has defaulted. The default flag is always forward looking. Give me 2 minutes time. Let me finish this statement. I'll go back to the example that we discussed and I'll clarify your doubt. Okay?
sure.
Just give me 2 minutes. Okay. So this is important so that the 12 month default flag is created. Okay. So can we okay. Just to answer Kshitij's question over here, that when I'm talking about ever default, this ever default should happen only with respect to the performance period. Now, if you remember, we had gone through this example, right, in the last class. So first was case one, where where we are talking about observation and performance inclusion. Now, my reference snapshot month was 2011-06. So, this customer had to be present from 2011-010 to 2011-05. So, that is the 13 months of observation. So, because the customer was there for the last 13 months, active on the books of the bank, I have put him in this snapshot. Yes. Now, in the next 12 months, the customer has been there as well. So for this customer, there was last 30 months of observation and 12 months of performance. In the second example, we spoke about the case where the customer had been present for the last 13 months, but as on the snapshot, he passed away. So he was not, or he closed his account, and in the next 12 months, he was not available. So even though the customer had not defaulted, right, even the customer was active on the books of the bank, I cannot include this customer in my snapshot because he was not present in the next 12 months, right? Now the question is, so this is how I would be incorporating an account in the books of the bank. right? I mean, on in my modeling snapshot. Now come to the next part, the concept of a performance default, right? So over here for account 12231, the question is the customer defaulted as on 2011-06? Now, Kshitij, if the customer had defaulted in any one of these months, had defaulted in and any one of these months up to this point, I will not be incorporating this customer in my snapshot only, right? Because the customer, as on 2011-06, the customer is already defaulted. So I do not need to compute a PD for that customer, or I do not need to take that customer into my account because it has already been defaulted. Now, when I'm building my PD model, I am choosing only those accounts which are active and on the books of the bank. Now, my question is now your question is where the ever default is. The concept of ever default is that over here in 2011-06 to 2012-06, right? So from 2011-07 to 2012-06, in these next 12 months, is the account defaulting. Now over here, I can see that in 2012-02 to 2012-05, this customer has satisfied the bad definition, right? And has entered into a default. So with respect to the 2011-06 next 12-month performance flag, the customer is a default. Now let's look into the now let's try to understand what does this ever default mean. So my first snapshot was 2011-06. Uh-huh. So my first snapshot was 2011-06, where my performance period was 2011-07 to 2012-06. That is July of 2011 to the June of 2012. That was my thing. Now I will, what is the next snapshot that I can choose over here? The next snapshot that I can choose over here is 2011-09, right? I can choose this snapshot over here. So if I am choosing 2011-09 as my snapshot, so what up to which point will this go? This will go till P1206, 07, 08, 09. And let's say the customer has no more gone through this, it continues to be N. Now, if I am starting from this snapshot, if I am starting from 2011-09, right? If I am starting from 2011-09, is this customer or will this customer be a defaulter in terms of 2011-09 snapshot? So in 2011-09, my account ID is 11231. What will be the next 12-month flag over here? So will this be a default flag or will this not be a default flag? That is what I want to know, right? Up to this point, it is clear, Kshitij. So all the
Yes.
customers who is there on these books as on 2011-09, right, has been there for the at least for the last 13 months. Now I start looking with respect to 2011-09. I start looking across. So on 2012, from 2012 to 2015, 2012-05, I see that the 90 days past due has been satisfied. but then again it has become zero. But because this period is falling in the 90 DPD is falling in the next 12 months with respect to 2011-09, what I will say is that yes, the performance as on 2011-09, 11231 is a performance default, right? And the flag is a forward looking flag. So in 2011-06, the account has defaulted, and then from 2012-06, 2012-07 onwards, this account has kept on being, you know, so this account has kept on being very proper, and it had started paying back from 2012-06. But because it defaulted in these, it defaulted between these 4 months. As long as these 4 months are coming in the performance period, this customer will always be will keep on flagging it as a defaulter. So this is what I mean by the ever defaulter definition. So in one snapshot, if you are following, if you have defaulted in the next 12 months, as long as that those 4 months of that 90 DPD keeps on coming in the performance, the customer will keep on, being flagged as as a defaulter. So basically, if I take it at 2011-12, right? So let's say I'm taking it at 2011-12. Even at 2011-12, this customer will be flagged as a, or this account ID will be flagged as a defaulter. So as long as this performance window keeps on coming in place, right? 11231 will always be flagged as a defaulter. So this is what I mean by the ever bad definition. Once you have been flagged as bad, as long as that patch keeps on coming in, you will be flagged as a defaulter. But now let's say you come to 2012-06 and your payment has been fine. So basically, from 20, with respect to 2012-06, you will not be flagged as a default. But as long as these 4 months keep on coming in the performance, the customer will that account will always be flagged on as a default, right? Now, generally, it is seen that once this one continues, you have a zero, and then you again have one, one, then zero, and it keeps on continuing, right? So it means, so once a borrower has defaulted, it means that its profile has become such that he is unable to pay back the dues. So generally, if you are not paying it for 4 months, we see that it goes on to 180, and then it's cracked off the books, right? So this is in the most mathematical sense, or in the most basic sense, right? I would say this is what I mean by the ever bad definition,
Okay, then got
right?
it. So yeah, so Tanmay, this borrower will not be in the snapshot of 2012-03, right? This will not
Correct,
be in the and it will only come
correct.
again in the snapshot of 2012-06.
06, right?
Okay.
So over here, the customer will not be there.
So indirectly, this methodology is taking care of cure. It's already treating cure also. It's taking cure into consideration and then moving forward,
Now,
right?
yes. So obviously there will be a probation period, right? So it takes into account cure, takes into account probation, if any prepayments are done, and so on. So there are different components which, so there are different factors which are taken in revising the flags, right? So maybe you are put into a probation for the next 6 months. So during those 6 months, you will keep on be flagged as a default.
Okay.
So as long as there is an unlikeliness to pay factor which is active, right? If the bank thinks that there's an unlikeliness of repayment, it will be put in there,
Okay.
right? Right. So, these are very few, so these are basic concepts which you always need to have in your mind and have them mapped with the regulation. Only when you can relate these concepts to the guidelines, only then will you be able to, you know, go ahead and build the right proper kind of models. But so just prepare yourself on this. So start reading the regulations. Okay. Uh, the next point that we have over here is while we were discussing the choice of the modeling snapshot, that a snapshot chosen for model development validation should only have seasoned accounts, that is, uh, the 13 months of observation, right? Uh, Accounts, unseasoned accounts or accounts which are removed as a part of exclusion is either treated under the calibration sample or is treated under the or is treated under the MOC adjustments. So we come to that, right? The so one of the important points that we need to have in mind is that, yeah. So these are the points. So these are the factors that should be chosen while we are choosing the model development snapshots. Now let's look at a basic example, right? Now, for example, when we have the data between 2011-06 to 2016-09. Now, for this interval, how do we choose our modeling snapshot? So, now the question is why 2011-06 to 2016-09? Because I ran all my results for this period, right? So, that is the reason. But, anyways, let's start with this. So, for this interval, how do we choose the modeling snapshot? Now, one way is that the modeling snapshot I can choose 2011-06, which will be now with 2011-06. The question is, do you have, you know, so do you have the 12 month of the performance period? The data is up to 2016-09, so you will have 2011-7 to 2012-06. So the answer is yes, you can do it. Now, the question that next comes up is that up to which point can I go? The maximum point that I can go up to is 2015-09. I cannot go beyond 2015-09 because my data ends at 2016-09. So 2015-09 is the last snapshot month where I can have where I can have a full blown 12 month of performance. So this is something that we need to keep in mind, right? So, so how would the performance period for them look like? So for 2011-09, it would start from 2011-10 to 2012-09, 12 months. 2011-12 is 2012-01 to 2012-12, like this for the next 12 months. So if anyone asks you during an interview that you are to how do you prepare the data, or what are the steps of model design, right? Or how so So start explaining to them from this point that these are the objectives, this is the data framework for the respective models, these are the types that needs to be incorporated. Then talk to them about the concept of snapshot months. Say that this is the data snapshot contains the period from this period to this period. From these months to choose the modeling snapshot, these are the criteria that we have looked at or that had to be taken into account. And from there, you can go on to explain to them the concept of performance bad, ever bad definition, and so on. Right? Okay. So while we have already discussed observation period and performance period while talking about modeling snapshot, let us quickly go through this concept of observation period. So an observation period is a historical period over which the behavior of a borrower is examined. So the objective of this is to see that or to find a criteria for its inclusion into the modeling snapshot. Now this period, okay, uh, the behavior of a borrower, the behavior is examined to check whether the account can be included in the development snapshot or in the modeling snapshots. The modeling snapshot. So all the model variables, model risk drivers are based on the observation period and historical data. So this is the reason why we use the observation period. Right? So historical period over which the behavior of a borrower is examined. So all the model risk drivers are based on the observation and the historical. So over here, we have used an example that if 2011-06 is chosen as a snapshot, should account ID 112321 be included in the snapshot? And the reason why it should be included in the snapshot is mentioned here. The reason when it should not be included in the snapshot is also mentioned here. Right? So we have spoken about these cases over here of performance inclusion, performance exclusion, and so on. And we have also mentioned the cases of the performance bad definition over here. So we have assessed all these aspects. We have already discussed all these aspects. I'm just revising them. So the next question that comes over here is that for retail portfolios, the observation period is to be seen roughly 13 months. So this is the period over which borrowers' behavior is seen to stabilize. This, the seasoning period, is assumed to be or is arrived through the seasoning analysis. So we'll talk about the seasoning analysis as well. Right. So over here, remember one thing, that when we are talking about these exclusions, like like seasoning analysis and all, right? So there is a question that often comes into the interview, is that what is the difference between the seasonality in observation snapshots, seasonality in modeling snapshots, and the concept of seasoning in modeling snapshot. So interviewers often try to trick you around questions of between seasoning and seasonality. So we have discussed both these two concepts over here, right? What is seasoning and what is seasonality, right? So the seasoning analysis is something which we will be discussing again here separately. And also there are guidelines around seasoning analysis that we will be considering. Okay. Now comes the next part, which is your performance period. So the performance period is nothing but it's a forward looking period from the snapshot month over which the behavior of a borrower is analyzed. This period is usually is essentially to make the forward looking by making the target variable or the default flag forward looking, right? Okay. So we have mentioned all these. So we have seen what a observation period is. We have seen what a performance period is. Now, while we are preparing the base, there is a very important part that we need to talk about. That is exclusion. So from the exclusions, you would have the variable exclusion waterfall. Guys, if you are kind of being interviewed for a Basel position, for IRB position, please ensure to discuss these points in detail with the interviewer, right? Because an interviewer would always want to listen to these places. I'm not saying that he would not be interested to listen to the statistical modeling side, but he would be more interested in understanding how a certain thing is done with respect to the regulations, right? So that is very important for them to understand, that you know guidelines, you understand how to align the guidelines to the development process, right? And what exactly are the steps. So these concepts are very critical when you are discussing them in the interviews, and it is mostly seen that if you can convey the data preparation and the model design part to an interviewer correctly, then the rest of the steps become much easier, right? I mean, I can say that for myself because I have seen that happen. right? So there are two types of exclusion exercises. One is observation exclusion or snapshot exclusion, and the other is the performance exclusion. So, for example, if a person is deceased or has closed an account as on the snapshot or has been defaulted in the snapshot, then those accounts are removed, right? So, talking about observation or snapshot exclusions, removing. So, basically, the idea is to remove irrelevant accounts from the snapshot, for which we do not need to compute the probability of default. So, what are the kind of accounts? Accounts which have closed as on the snapshot, accounts which are charged off, written off, or have defaulted on the snapshot, deceased accounts which have been deceased as on the snapshot. So we saw that. So one of the examples, right, we used them. Then you have the immaterial accounts. So immaterial account is something which you can apply for a fixed term loan product, but for revolving products you cannot. Immaterial accounts, bankrupt, and frauds. Now performance exclusion is which will be irrelevant after the performance merging is done. That is, in the next 12 months, if an account has closed up in between, I don't need that. If an account has been default, like if an account has uh, deceased, I don't need that. Right. However, deceased accounts have been put under the bad definition for performance, and hence it has like this criteria has kind of been removed. Right. So, but if the account has, so basically based on some of the factors, so let's say in the performance there has been operational fraud or bankruptcy for that account, then that account is removed, right? So hence the account would be a part of the snapshot, but yeah, so basically in terms of performance, those accounts would not be considered. So these are the two broad kind of exclusions. That is, one is observation exclusions, that is accounts which are directly removed at the snapshot. So when you're preparing, so basically if I'm preparing 2011-06, there are some accounts which are directly removing from there because of the factors mentioned. Then there is a set of factors, accounts which in the next 12 months satisfies one of the exclusion criteria and they are removed. So exclusions of irrelevant accounts, observations, performance exclusions become important, right? So these are the important part which you require for model development for understanding the data. Now the choice of the observation period, performance period differs from from models to models, right? Okay, I have a question from Tonmoy and Mubashir. I'll take those questions up and then we'll move forward. Uh, Mubashir's question is that is the past 25 months from the current month taken as observation and performance period if the PD is to be developed today? Not only the past 25 months, Mubashir, your historical data, your data for model development can include 10 years of data, right? So let's suppose my data is from 2006 to 2023, right? If I'm developing a model today. So each of the months from 2006 to 2023 is a snapshot. But can I use 2006 as a modeling? The answer is no, because I don't have the information of the last 13 months of information, right? So the first month that I would use is 2706 as the modeling snapshot, because at 2706 I have 13 months of observation and I have 12 months of performance information. So 2706 becomes my first modeling snapshot. What will be the last modeling snapshot? The last modeling snapshot can be at max it can be up to the second quarter of 2023-06, right? Because If you take a September, like September or December, you will not get a 12 month of performance, complete 12 month of performance. So the last snapshot that I would take is 2000, like 2023 06, right? So whenever I am choosing any sample month as a snapshot, I need to ensure that for that month, with respect to that month, there must be 13 months of observation and 12 months of performance. Does that explain your on question, Mubashir? Any follow-up questions? Perfect. Okay. Now coming to the performance exclusions. Okay, so we discussed about performance exclusion. Okay. The account would be a part of the snapshot. Now, when I talk about this observation performance period, we have mentioned that only the seasoned accounts are the ones which can be used. So this is where the concept of seasoning analysis comes to us. Right? So this is where we talk about seasoning analysis. Now the objective of seasoning analysis is to assess the riskiness of the borrower with reference to his vintage on the books of the bank. So this is a relationship between the month on books and the month on books and the default rates at the portfolio level, right? So the Basel guidelines, and remember, this is something which is very specific to the retail portfolios, right? Seasoning analysis would not make much of a sense for a wholesale portfolio. So basically, the idea over here is that if a borrower is seasoned and has been paying back his dues over a time for a substantially long period of time, then there is a relatively low chance that he would default on his obligation. There is a relatively low chance that he would default on his obligations. So, with seasoning analysis, there is a set of regulations that Basel talks about. So, we will talk about that part in detail, right? So, let's take a pause here for the day. I'll start off with seasoning analysis and finish the remaining part of model design, right? And then we'll go to talk about PD and EAD and LGD models in terms of their model design. So seasoning analysis is something very specific to PD, right? Even though covariate creation, variable selection frameworks are something which is central to everyone, but over here we are initially discussing it with respect to PD. Then I'll talk about EAD and LGD as well. We'll talk about EAD and LGD separately because with EAD there are different concepts like the loan equivalent factor, concepts like drawdown factor, the credit conversion factor, and so on. So we will talk about them separately, right? So let's take a pause here for the day, and please. So your video will be ready in the next 10 minutes. You can go through the videos. I am not uploading the updated Excel over here today. I will upload it once we have created the PDN, like the model design for PD, right? So we'll also talk about the guidelines over here. We'll talk about variable selection. We'll talk about variable reduction and all these aspects. And then we'll go to talk about the guidelines related to PD model, right? PD quantification, risk identification with PD models, risk quantification with PD models. So we'll talk about all of them, right? Model calibration and stuff. We'll cover everything. So once we have covered these guidelines on PD LGD, again we'll go back and we'll start developing the model on the statistical side of it, right? So let's take a pause here. The video will be ready in the next 10 minutes. Please go through it once before the session tomorrow, and from there we'll take it up. Thanks a lot.
What is the alternative to seasoning analysis in wholesale portfolios?
Wholesale we generally do not do the seasoning analysis to know because portfolio like wholesale portfolio are always legacy portfolios, right? So for example,
Mhm.
there is Tata, right? Tata Group, who is a legacy, let's say, customer with HSBC. Now you have Tata 1mg being onboarded this month. So in such a case, you don't do a seasoning analysis. So you may have a parent, right? And the parent transfers the rating of the parent to the subsidiary, right? So through the parental support framework, you know that okay, there is a backup of this. In case this customer defaults, I know the parent is over there. So the structure in the portfolio structure in a wholesale setup is very different, right? So therefore, we do not uh, do seasoning analysis. However, uh, the relationship that seasoning analysis explores is present in the wholesale portfolios, that the rating of the borrower improves over a period of time. So the synonymous behavior exists, but we do not do any separate analysis over there, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you guys. Thank you for your time, and we meet at same time tomorrow. Bye bye.
Tanmay,
Yeah. Tell me.
Tanmay, one thing, you are uploading the code in which drive? Because the link I am having is 0.1.1. I think you are uploading somewhere else.
If you go to the
Uh,
code folder, yeah, if you go to the code folder, go to the regulatory folder. In the code folder, there is a BCBS का folder,
तन्मय,
and the code is
I'm
over.
very sorry, but वो मुझे मिल नहीं रहा है. I have tried on the. Can I show my screen to you? If
ठीक है, मैं
uh,
आपको लिंक भेज देता हूँ WhatsApp में. मैं आपको WhatsApp
sure. Thank you, Tanmay. Thank you so much. Yeah,
ठीक है.
yeah,
Thanks
yeah.
a lot.
Thank you,
Thanks a
Tanmay.
lot, Shutosh.